Truth in advertising, however, I was given firm instructions by Mary to keep within today's timeline. I think that was because during my last presentation, she observed that during the first 10 minutes, 90% of the audience paid attention. However, during the second 10 minutes, 50% were distracted. During the third 10 minutes, 100% were engaged in sexual fantasies. So, with a discipline I have not shown in many years, I will attempt to comply and proceed forthwith. Two basic admonitions today, since we're trying to look into the future. I've often been accused of being much better at forecasting the past than forecasting the future. And second, I've also been accused of being the Dr. Kevorkian of the New Jersey economy. Very unfair, very, very unfair, but probably due to the simple fact that I've actually forecast fully nine of our last 5 recessions. So you are twice forewarned. It's hard to believe, but this year, 2020, marks the third decade of the 21st century, the third decade of the new millennium. So I think it's certainly appropriate at this point in time to step back and start with a benchmark of the current status of New Jersey. So I'd like to provide a brief cutting-edge profile of our beloved Garden State. And this is going to consist of 6 demographic and economic factoids. Number 1, New Jersey currently has the second highest median household income among the 48 continental states. Actually, Maryland had the sheer audacity to knock us off of our top-ranked perch 8 years ago, a position we had long held. Nonetheless, our income has remained 32% higher than that of the nation. So I think that benchmarks our unique demographic economic capacity. If we seceded from the United States and became a separate nation, we'd be the wealthiest industrialized nation on earth, followed closely by Luxembourg. Now, that assumes that Maryland was not smart enough to secede, but we were. Obviously, and unfortunately, a sweeping statement like that must have a major caveat, and it certainly does. At the same time, New Jersey ranks number one in housing costs. While our incomes are 32% higher than that of the nation, our housing costs are 58% higher. So I think a part of our income advantage is consumed by higher shelter costs. So our strong income metric often obscures our severe cost and housing affordability problems. Factoid 2, New Jersey currently ranks 3rd among all 50 states in the percentage of foreign-born, just slightly behind New York. 23% of the state's population is foreign-born, compared to 13.5% for the United States. 23.5 versus 13.5. That benchmarks our unique demographic diversity, and that's a key advantage in a global economy. Number 3, New Jersey ranks 2nd in mass transit usage. 11% of Garden Staters use mass transit, more than double the nation's 5% rate. So that demonstrates our unique demographic transportation virtue. Very few states have equivalent statewide public transit infrastructures. Number 4, unfortunately, New Jersey ranks 3rd in time of commute. I think that demonstrates our unique demographic transportation fortitude. Nothing, absolutely nothing inhibits New Jerseyans from getting to work every morning. Number 5, New Jersey ranks number 1 in density. We're the densest state in America, a status we've held since 1970, 50 years ago. We are the only state with more than 1,000 people per square mile, a status achieved in 1982, 38 years ago. Our current density is just over 1,200 people per square mile. To put that into perspective, the density of Japan is 900 people per square mile. Density of India is 1,022 people per square mile, and we're over 1,200. So that demonstrates our demographic resiliency. Finally, despite this density, a higher proportion of New Jersey is covered by forest than states such as California and Alaska. In fact, New Jersey has more horses per capita than any other state in the nation. Or, from a horse's perspective, there are fewer humans per horse in New Jersey than any other state, and horses like it like that. So I think that demonstrates our unique environment and quality of life, and that's another key advantage in a knowledge-driven economy. So, 2020 New Jersey baseline: affluence, high incomes, high economic capacity, but a severe cost and a severe affordability problem. We're the densest state in the nation with a high proportion of mass transit dependence, but we suffer congestion and long commutation times. Diversity is in our DNA, and we have unique environmental attributes. So I think some of those are key baseline parameters as we plan for the future. So within this context, let's briefly look at the national economic condition, which virtually overrides everything that takes place and will take place in New Jersey and the NJTPA region. So where exactly are we in the national business cycle? To badly paraphrase Benjamin Franklin, in this world, nothing can be said to be certain except death, taxes, and a continuation of the business cycle. Never pauses, never stops, and there's no way to avoid its changing impact on absolutely everything. So where are we now? In June of 2009, we exited the great 2007-2009 recession and entered the recovery and expansion phase of the cycle. That's indicated on the left side of the slide, June 2009, the trough. The arrow on the right side indicates where we are today, January 2020, still in the expansion phase more than 10 years later. This is the economic surprise of the 21st century, an expansion that has spanned the entire second decade of the century. It's the first decade in the history of the United States that we did not have a recession. And as we proceed into the third decade, the economy is still heading upward. It's slowing, but still moving upward. The expansion has now reached 127 months in length, stretching from June 2009 to January 20, 10 years and 7 months. Believe it or not, it is now the longest upcycle in the nation's history, the status it achieved last July. Since it follows the Great Recession, it probably deserves the label the Great Expansion. Despite this longevity, I think more New Jerseyans believe they've had an out-of-body experience than believe the expansion is now the longest in history. But it is what it is. As a point of reference, the previous record holder, now number 2 in length, was the 120-month-long 91 to 2001 expansion. That's indicated on the bottom of the slide. So full congratulations are in order to all of you. Since you are all still vertical, you have not yet gone toes up, you have lived through the 2 longest economic expansions in the history of the Republic. You have also lived through the Roaring Tens. The Roaring Tens. The 2010s actually turned out to be the best decade job growth on record. That's indicated in the bottom of the slide. We'll leave question of the quality of the jobs to another session. And it was a dramatic turnaround from the first decade of the century when we lost 1 million jobs. That was truly a lost employment decade. In any case, 100 years ago, we were entering the Roaring 20s, the Roaring 2020s. Are we now entering the Roaring 2020s? I think only future economic historians will be able to answer that question. Of more immediate importance, how long can the current expansion last? Well, before I definitively answer that question, I should point out to you that views of the national economy have been hardening along hyper-partisan lines. As you can see in this slide, the red line, 70% of Republicans think the economy is getting better, while at the bottom in the blue line, only 10% of Democrats think the economy is getting better. Both are looking at the same set of statistical data, the exact same metrics. Now, in this highly polarized world, I think it is well recognized that I am the only totally objective person in the state of New Jersey. So rest assured that I'm going to be right in my economic outlook. As you can see, Morgan Freeman fully agrees with me. So with his endorsement, I'll go out on a limb, way out on a limb, and give you my totally objective forecast, my highly learned forecast. The great expansion definitely will continue until it doesn't. Seriously, we are in uncharted territory. We've never had an expansion that entered its second decade of growth. Nonetheless, despite its longevity, the current expansion still has some gas left in the tank. It's still got game. So rest assured, while the economy is not going gangbusters, a recession is not yet on the agenda. And you can take that learned forecast to the bank. Now, speaking of banks, it should be pointed out that mature expansions rarely die of old age. They rarely die in their beds. The Federal Reserve usually murders them by sharply increasing interest rates. And that's certainly not in the cards. The Fed has cut interest rates 3 times last year and is not about to raise them anytime soon. In any case, let's put our current situation into perspective. Australia, the wonder down under, hasn't had a recession since 1991, 29 years ago. So that's something we can at least aspire to. 2020 problem, which I'm sure you're all aware, labor shortages are inhibiting growth. Employers are having an increasingly difficult time filling open positions. There are 7 million unfilled jobs nationally, a record level. There are 500,000 manufacturing jobs that are unfilled nationally. So we have far more job openings than unemployed people nationally. So that suggests a national economy still trying to push forward despite a number of uncertainties and geopolitical risks, with job growth actually being inhibited today by labor force constraints. So what about New Jersey and the Garden State economy? Truth be told, no sugarcoating allowed. It's not a soaring state economy. It's not a high-flying state economy. It's also not a sinking New Jersey economy. It's not heading into the dumpster. Basically, it's an okay economy going forward. And coming from Dr. Kevorkian, that's a very positive assessment. Let's look at the unemployment or the employment metrics to examine this position. And we'll compare briefly New Jersey with our current neighbors and then to the United States. Between 2010 and 2018, the nation's growth rate, 17.7%, is clearly ahead of New Jersey's 11.2%. Now, that lag is not unique to New Jersey. It's characteristic of the entire Northeast region of the United States. However, New Jersey's 11.2% growth rate eclipses that of Pennsylvania, 8.9%, and is nearly double that of Connecticut's 6.3%. As you can see in the numbers there, we are lagging New York State. However, New York State figures are bulwarked by the unique economic boom taking place in New York City. If we extracted the Big Apple from the New York State data, New Jersey would be leading New York State in that regard. So our regional performance is more than okay. We're doing very, very well. So outlook for 2020, the state's going to have a Goldilocks economy. Not too hot, not too cold, just about right. We don't have a bubble propping up growth, and we don't have a chance of inflation hitting us. So looking forward, our cyclical fortunes will be tightly linked to the national business cycle. Structurally, New Jersey, as well as the Northeast region, will probably lag that of the nation. And that's linked to demographic lag, which I'll get back to later. Okay, time to pivot, applying all of the keen analytical ability that I've honed during my many decades at Rutgers. I think I've been pushing economics a little too much. So this is the result. So let's put that behind us. I'm now going to focus on demographics, which should hopefully cheer you up. So Bottom demographic line, we are in the midst of the greatest generational transformation of history. And this overall transformation consists of 5 age-defined demographic long waves that are shaping today, and they're going to continue to shape the future. Each successor long wave or generation is more diverse than its predecessor. As you can see in the slide, the first is the rapidly maturing suburban-centric baby boom, born 46 to 64. Second is a middle-aging Gen X, or baby bust, born between 65 and 80. Rising urban-centric young adult millennials, or Gen Y, born between 81 and 1996. Gen Z, born 97 to 2012. Gen Alpha, born post 2012, now entering toddlerhood. So let's review each and start with the ancients. The fabled, oversized baby boom, born 46 to 64. That was the most influential demographic event of the second half of the 20th century. It comprises mainly descendants of the great European immigration waves of the late 19th and early 20th century. Throughout each of its life cycle stages, moving left to right, from birth to geezerhood, the baby boom dominated New Jersey, sending tidal waves through the economy and society. Sorry, all you baby boomers out there. The arrow is indicating your position today. You're moving ever further to the right side. So this is one example of my new favorite academic spectator sport, taunting baby boomers by telling them that they are now in the pre-deceased stage of the life cycle, the pre-deceased stage. This year, 2020, the baby boom will be between 56 and 74 years of age. Harsh reality, every 7.5 seconds, another baby boomer will turn 74 years in the United States. Every 7.5 seconds, another baby boomer will turn 74 years of age. That's 11,000 per day, a pace far outstripping the casualty rate of hunting accidents and car wrecks combined. And they consider this a calamity of biblical proportions. Suffice it to say, at one time, baby boomers used to rock around the clock. Now they're struggling to limp around the block. Rock around the clock to limp around the block. Now, I think I discern some chuckling millennials and Gen Xers out there. So, admonition 1, challenge boomers at your peril. Remember, they are old for a reason. They have survived for a reason. Let's look a little deeper into why. Admonition 2, youth and agility are no match for old age and treachery. So be careful out there, youngsters, because the baby boom is not going to go away quietly. As I will point out later, the baby boom still got game, serious economic game, but change is coming. Increasingly, their daily commutation days are fading. Post-automobile mobility imperatives will become increasingly disruptive. Second long wave, make way for the Gen Xers. Move over, boomers. 2020 is the beginning of a new era. The first Gen Xers turned 55 this year. It was originally called the baby bust because it was a very small, undersized population cohort born between 65 and 80, which is a very low birth period. Basically, it's a cohort of contraction, a moving indentation on our age structure charts. And it is a generation, despite being small, ultimately became much more diverse than the baby boom because of the Immigration Act of 1965. Historical moment, October 3rd, 1965. As I think you can see clearly in the slide, Lyndon Johnson signing the act at the Statue of Liberty, Lower Manhattan in the background. And some of you oldsters out there may remember some of these long ago faces. Lady Bird, Hubert Humphrey, John Lindsay, Abe Beame, Ted and Bobby Kennedy, all at this momentous event. In any case, today Gen X is America's neglected middle child. It's sandwiched between the two noisy behemoths, the baby boom and millennials. It's now in mid-career, poised to assume the leadership ranks left open by exiting boomers. So all you maturing Gen Xers out there, we're depending upon you. The mantle of leadership will soon be thrust upon you. Remember, your disruptive power will be very, very awesome, so be careful. Third demographic cohort, Gen Y millennials. I think everybody's probably suffering from millennial fatigue, so please bear with me, I'll be quick. Millennials born between 81 and 96, first population cohort born and reared in the digital age, the first digital age generation. That's their key defining element. Well, not completely. More recently, they have been known as Generation Avocado Toast, the new breakfast of champions. In any case, millennials are largely the offspring of the baby boom, bolstered substantially by immigration and immigration offspring. So right now, it is the most diverse urban-centric workforce generation in post-war history. During the 2010s, it supplanted the baby boom as the largest labor market segment. As you all realize, they become the prized labor force commodity, eagerly sought by a corporate America that requires next-gen digital talent. And where that talent wants to be drives locational decision-making. To this point, much of their post-recession spatial movements could be described as sprawl withdrawal. But now the era of family-raising millennials is commencing, and urban fatigue may be setting in. This year, they're between 24 and 39 years of age, the prime child-rearing stage of the life cycle. Residential choices of maturing millennials will further shape the metropolitan landscape, particularly when they become homeowners. Now, in this context, unfortunately, there is concern about their financial ability and whether they have the savings discipline to become homeowners. Now, I don't want to sound like an Old Testament prophet railing against millennial fiscal frailties, because I know it is really difficult to defer immediate consumption and to defer instant gratification in order to plan, save, and invest for the future. But it can be done, and my own experience shows this. Now, when I was a kid, I used to play a popular game known as Spin the Bottle. Now, perhaps for some of you, it was before your time, but in one version of this game, a girl spins a Coke bottle, and when it points at a boy who is playing, she either has to kiss him or pay him a nickel. Now, when I was a kid, nickel had significant purchasing power. Now, I played that game an awful lot when I was young, with the unexpected result, by the age of 14, I owned my first home. So very painful, but it can be done. Fourth generation, originally post-millennials, now Gen Z. If you're tired of criticizing millennials, you will soon have a new generation to worry about. Originally termed post-millennials, Gen Z has become the widespread moniker. Born between 97 and 12, it's the first post-World War II generation born in two different centuries. While Gen Y millennials comprised the first generation raised in the digital age, post-millennial Gen Zers comprised the first generation raised in the mobile era of smartphones and social media. So they have grown up with access and hyperconnectivity to everything, everywhere, instantaneously. This year, 2020, the oldest Gen Zers turned 23, just graduated from college. So move over, millennials. All new young entry labor force members are now members of Gen Z. And they will be applying to you for jobs. So this is your future. Will they be hostile to working in the suburbs? Or will they embrace suburbia as the new frontier in order to differentiate themselves from their millennial predecessors? One thing is certain, they are already highly suspicious and critical of older generations. So you better be prepared for some ensuing disruption. Finally, our fifth generation, Generation Alpha, starting in 2013, largely children of millennials. When we got to Gen Z, we had a problem. We reached the end of the Latin alphabet. So we shifted to the first letter of the Greek alphabet, and that's consistent with switches usually made in the scientific literature. But this is the first generation born totally in the 21st century. They are destined to be another cohort of contraction. Fertility rates nationally and in New Jersey have been trending downward since the Great Recession. In fact, the 2018 fertility rate in the United States was the lowest in the history of the United States. This portends a future of fewer children, fewer young people. Since birth, alphas had screens placed in front of them, so they've been called screenagers. They're going to be raised in an era of artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, and robotics. Now, how this will shape the very essence of this generation is really for future researchers to determine. But, as was the case for millennials and Gen Z, digital advances are going to prove to be instrumental. So, the bottom line, generational transformations will continue to spawn demographic disruptions. For example, as a result of these generational transitions, decline in fertility, a new intergenerational benchmark has just been reached. A new gray dawn is starting to arrive. We're careening toward a future with a lot more geezers and fewer youngsters. This year, for the first time, we'll have more Americans over 60 years of age than we have young Americans under 18 years of age. More people over 60 than under 18. So it's kids versus canes. Is this the new multi-generational divide? So I think a new imperative is connecting across generations, promoting social and economic linkages between young and old. However, this is not going to be an easy task. It's undeniable, and this is causing resentment, that we are a nation still dominated by boomer wealth. According to the Federal Reserve, the total wealth of all American households is $122 trillion. $122 trillion. To refresh your memory, a trillion equals 1,000 billion. So that's serious money, 122 trillion. As can be seen in the slide shaded in yellow, the baby boom holds over half, 54.3%, over $66 trillion. So, two more admonitions. For all you youngsters out there, don't confront boomers with your latest taunt. Okay, boomer. That's the harshest thing you can say to baby boomers today. The intergenerational transfer of wealth in the decade ahead is going to be a very powerful force that could benefit you. So be nice. Admonition 2, for all you aging boomers out there, you must confront an unpleasant truth. You can't take it with you. You're going to have to do something with it. So it's possible that wealth and its ultimate distribution will provide one common ground for intergenerational cooperation. Okay, 5 other transformational forces before the plug is pulled on me. First, the great regional exodus and the immigration locomotive. Now, it may come as some surprise to some of you, but people are actually leaving the broad 4-state, 35-county metropolitan region centered on New York City. They're departing for someplace else in the country. How dare they? This is the metropolitan region that I'm going to focus on. Fully encompasses the 13-county NJTPA region. Now, as you know, the Census Bureau measures 2 types of migration. The first is net domestic migration and is limited to origins and destinations within the U.S. It measures the difference between the number of people moving into and moving out of an area. Here are the domestic numbers for the region. Between April 1 2010 and July 1, 2018, the region had a net domestic migration loss of over 1.4 million people. 1.4 million people. 1.4 million more people moved out than moving in. To drill down deeper, that's every single day. 460, we lose on a net basis 469 people leaving the region to places elsewhere in the United States. For those of you who are mathematicians, it's 3,013 days between April 1, 2010 and July 1, 2018. So, will the last person out please turn off the lights? Fortunately, there's a counterforce that allows the region to avoid a demographic catastrophe. And this is the second type of migration, international. International composes moves whose origins are external to the United States. It serves as a significant but not complete replacement. Approximately 935,000 international in-movers versus 1.4 million domestic out-movers. So international migration has actually become the primary source of population growth. It's really the demographic engine of the region. It's the demographic engine of New Jersey. Nonetheless, if you see, the difference between domestic and international is still a negative minus 478,000 people. Fortunately, we're still adding people the old-fashioned way, something known as births, even though they've been declining very significantly. And that enabled the region to have positive population growth just barely between 2010 and 2018. But births have been declining as a source of population growth, and the 35-county region actually lost population the last 2 years. In any case, we have a real domestic out-migration problem, and this is the subject of intense partisan political debate causing the out-migration. So here's how I sidestep this third rail issue. What I tell my students is that these out-migration patterns are really the result of a fundamental navigation error made by the Pilgrims. They didn't want to go to Plymouth, Massachusetts. They actually wanted to go to Santa Monica, California. But somehow their navigation systems got messed up and they wound up in Massachusetts. And we've been trying to correct for that navigation error ever since. Seriously, out-migration is not solely a New Jersey problem. It's not a New York regional phenomenon. We are not alone. There are broad, multi-state regional population flows. These are the 4 population regions of the United States. We're the little area on the upper right-hand side of the slide, the Northeast region. We're the oldest, most mature part of the country. The Northeast had a net domestic migration loss of over 2.2 million between 2010 and 2018. In contrast, look at the South, third line down. It had a net in-migration of over 3 million people. So the Northeast region was the big domestic loser, the South the big winner. Thus, we have an out-migration problem for the entire Northeast region of the United States, as well as the Midwest region has the same problem. International, you can see, to some degree helps counterbalance the losses, but it also bolsters very strongly the scale of growth that's taking place in the South. So that has many, many ramifications. Bottom line, though, is immigration is now our demographic growth engine. Without it, we would be confronting a demographic apocalypse. Further national context, with fertility rates at a historic low, the nation now faces demographic stagnation for the balance of the century. The 2010, on the far right, is estimated by Bill Fry of the Brookings Institution. The 7.1% growth rate between 2010 and 2020 is the lowest decade growth rate ever since the first census was undertaken in 1790. So the problem of stagnation for the nation will translate into a population contraction problem for the region. Already, as I mentioned before, for the last 2 years, the 35-county region suffered population losses. The last 2 years, New Jersey suffered losses. New York State has suffered population losses for the past 4 years. Okay, second, the global emergence of dominant superstar cities. I think as we all realize, we're enmeshed in an innovation-based industrial revolution. It's an economy where superstar employees work for superstar firms that are agglomerated into superstar cities. And these superstar cities are potent magnets for the cutting-edge digital elite. The end result is the concentration of entrenched top tech firms and superstar talent in a few favored places. And New York City, fortunately, is America's leading global superstar, which we're tied in with. Nonetheless, New York City, in the 2010 to 2018 period, still had an outmigration loss of 255 people per day. Again, they've been bolstered by immigration. So it is simultaneously experiencing a brain drain and a brain gain, and that's the case for the region as a whole. And just like the region, New York City has slipped into population decline between 2016 and 2018. Third, our office ecosystem. This is where much of our innovation and knowledge-based economy is housed. And it's going to continue the structural transformation that started with the Great Recession. The new global corporate office market dynamic, the belief that innovation thrives in dense, interactive, multifunctional creative environments and is stifled in insular, one-dimension suburban campuses. So what we've been experiencing is that 20th century economic dinosaurs are being removed from the inventory, while other suburban and urban product is being transformed into 21st century economic assets. And this overall office market ecology has been changing rapidly, and that's going to continue to proceed during the future. Fourth, as you're all well aware, the revolution in retailing, e-commerce, fulfillment, and distribution has yet to run its course. Advancing IT and changing consumer expenditure habits are revolutionizing how shopping takes place for all demographics. Clicks are replacing bricks, and the traditional bricks and mortar retail meltdown is still gathering momentum. At the same time, e-commerce is revolutionizing our warehouse logistics infrastructure, and the proliferation of fulfillment centers continues. So, happiness instantaneously delivered. But how that happiness gets delivered the last mile, vans, autonomous vehicles, drones, robots, whatever, has yet to be fully invented. And that's going to continue the revolution. And finally, fifth, despite manifold changes and disruptions, one 20th century legacy refuses to die, and it still lives on, refuses to expire. Car dependence in America is alive and well and continues to grow in the 21st century, despite fewer miles driven per person. Nationally, between 2005 and 2018, the number of vehicles driven by American households increased by 25 million in that period. There are now 1.8 vehicles per household in America. Even in transit-rich New York City, there are 1.3 vehicles per household. So many recession-inspired counter trends are looking like they were just temporary. So, unfortunately, all forecasters are wrong eventually. Unfortunately, all forecasters are calamitously wrong eventually. But fortunately, eventually can be a very long time. And when eventually finally does arrive, I'll be long out of here and I'm not going to be easily found. But seriously, after doing economic and demographic forecasts for more than 4 decades, I think you should now take my projections as gospel. You have my personal guarantee that they will occasionally be right. So let me spare you some gruesome details and briefly sum up in one sentence. Widespread and unrelenting technological, economic, and demographic disruptions and structural change will continue to characterize our future. Now, in this context, we may be approaching the point where the region may have to be remarketed and rebranded to compete in this new era of rolling disruptions and regional shifts. And I should point out there are always marketing and branding opportunities, particularly since things often aren't always what they seem to be. So keep your eyes open for unanticipated possibilities. So, a brief story about Frank Perdue, the chicken man, who passed away in 2005 at age 84, should prove instructive about rebranding and finding creative opportunities. Now, some of you may remember Frank Perdue was ubiquitous on TV in the 70s and 80s, and he was singularly responsible for branding a very boring commodity, chicken. Chicken was just a simple commodity until Perdue came along. Remember the phrase? It takes a tough man to make a tender chicken. And he was very aggressive and creative in his branding efforts. At one point, he actually went to Rome and secured an audience with the Pope. He says, "Your Holiness, I have a proposition for you. I would like the Lord's Prayer changed by one word. Instead of, 'Give us this day our daily bread,' I would like it to read, 'Give us this day our daily chicken.' I will offer you $250 million to make this change." Pope said, "Don't be ridiculous," and tossed him out. 2 weeks later, Perdue returned and said, "This is more important than I thought. I will offer you $800 million to change the Lord's Prayer to give us this day our daily chicken." He was once again dispatched. But Perdue was very, very persistent and really wanted to finish the deal, came back and finally offered $3 billion to change the word bread to chicken. The Pope was visibly shaken by this sum of money. He immediately called Giuseppe, his secret trusted financial advisor, and asked, "How firm is our contract with Pepperidge Farm?" Now, I was reminded earlier not to forget that the brain can only absorb what the seat can endure, and I sense I'm starting to stress your endurance. So before absorption completely fades, let's finish up this session. One final word. It was my job today to speak. It was yours to listen. I do hope we finished at the same time. So welcome to 2020 and the economic, demographic, and digital disruptions to come. So thank you very much.